Welcome and thank you for joining Esri's National Government Webinar Series. My name is Ricklin Hookreed and I'm on the Defense and Intelligence team here at Esri. Today your presenters are Tasha Shaw and Lane Graham, who are both solution engineers at Esri in the Geospatial Center on the Science Civilian team. We also have Craig Cleveland, the lead solution engineer in the Geospatial Center. He will be moderating the questions and polls today. You may ask questions at any time during the webinar through the question box on your right, and we will provide answers during the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. This session is being recorded and will be sent to you in a follow-up email. I now turn the webinar over to Tasha.
This is Tasha Shaw. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to cover the agenda of the topics that we'll be seeing today. And at first, we're going to be going through a couple of problem statements that we've heard from our customers when it comes to sharing information across platforms. And we're going to show you the value that distributed collaboration brings to each of these different types of use cases. Lane is then going to show you what these use cases look like and the patterns that they follow. And they can be between ArcGIS Enterprise portals and ArcGIS Enterprise portal and ArcGIS Online. Following that, we're going to dive into the nuts and bolts of a distributed collaboration. And then finally, we're going to show you a demo of how to create one and how to share data. We're going to give you information on key release functionality. In this current release, there are a couple of exciting little nuggets that we're happy to share with you. And throughout today's presentation, we're going to have a couple of poll questions to get a little information from your side and to be a little more interactive. So let's go ahead and jump in. So these are the kinds of challenges that we have found our customers having. For example, if you are working with somebody in another department or another organization, but you don't necessarily have a login with credentials to where their data and content are stored. That can be a little bit of a stumbling block. Another thing is copying data from an authoritative source. So let's say you need data from an authoritative source in a timely manner, but once you get the copy, all of a sudden it's out of date. So I'd like to give you an example of a use case that is in our customer space where there was a department that is in charge of an authoritative data layer of streets. And other departments in this organization rely on the authoritative street layer. And so before putting in or implementing distributed collaboration, what they found is that in the process of sharing the street data with the different departments, whether it was through a file email, whether it was putting it on a shared drive or in a shared geodatabase, more often than not, little edits were made here and there, and then all of a sudden, it's no longer authoritative. The copy of the copy, and the further it goes down the line, the more it changes. So they decided to implement distributed collaboration so they could copy that data from the authoritative department out to all the other departments that needed the authoritative data set. And that's quite a common use pattern for distributed collaboration. So distributed collaboration establishes a trusted connection behind the scenes between your portals or portal and ArcGIS Online, and the data sharing and the data updates and information product updates. It's not just data, it can be web maps, it can be scenes, it can be tile layers, documents. We'll look at a host of different types of content that can be shared through collaboration. But these things are automatically synced behind the scenes. So you're taking that manual bit out of there. You don't have to physically do an update. It all happens on a schedule behind the scenes that you set up. And in the end, really, you're getting that common operational picture, or if you think about the example that I just mentioned, everybody is going to see the current authoritative data set. If it's data that you're sharing and copying, everybody is going to have access to that same authoritative data set, which is really, really important. You're not using something that is out of date. So let's start off with a polling question. I'm going to hand this over to Craig Cleveland to take us through.
Thanks, Tasha. All right, so on your end, you all should see a quick polling question come up. because as Tasha gets us introduced here to distributed collaboration and some of the key ways in which we can use it, we want to understand if you're using it today, and if you are, what pattern you're using that. If you're using it from a portal to portal, or from ArcGIS Online to an ArcGIS Enterprise portal, or maybe you're not using it at all yet. But this would be great just to help us get an understanding of where you all are at with distributed collaboration here. So we're going to give it another moment or two to let a few of these answers roll in, and we'll see what that looks like. All right, fantastic. So what we can see actually is that the vast majority of us out there haven't implemented distributed collaboration at all yet. So that's interesting, and that's okay. That's fantastic, because we are going to cover a number of different topics today, and Tasha and Lane are really going to help you understand not only some of the great things you can do with collaboration, but how you can get started with it. So let's move along here. Next up, I am going to pass it over to Lane Graham, who's going to talk to you about some additional use cases for sharing content and the ways in which you can do that. Lane?
Thank you, Craig. So we're going to discuss use cases for collaborations between portal to portal and ArcGIS Online and portal. So in this particular use case, it mirrors the street center line example that Tasha shared, where we have a central agency or department that shares an authoritative data set with other agencies, departments, or partners. Distributed collaboration is an ideal scenario for this particular situation because the recipients will always be getting authoritative data. The edits and updates will happen on the authoritative side and get pushed out to the recipients from the host via an automatic process enabled through the sync interval. All right. Flipping the script from the previous scenario, in this example, we can see a central agency or organization needs data from other agencies or partners. They use multiple collaborations to take advantage of data coming in from these partners in an automated fashion. The central agency can overlay the data into valuable information products to be shared inside or outside the organization. Okay. So here we see a very common use case for our customer space. In this scenario, the customer has an enterprise portal behind the firewall and cannot allow outside stakeholders or the public to access it. In order to copy data into information products outside the organization, they've set up a collaboration with an ArcGIS Online organization that gives access to outside stakeholders. Another benefit of this configuration is that the organization takes advantage of ArcGIS Online's scalability. If a shared app, for instance, goes viral, as in the case of EPA's Air Now website, during times of increased wildfire activity, ArcGIS Online scalability can allocate resources to meet the increased demand. Okay. So in this use case, we see a scenario where an organization has contributors of data, but they're not members of the organization, nor are they allowed to access the portal behind the firewall. An example of this would be temporary field workers or citizen scientists that are collecting data for an organization. They would then collect the data in ArcGIS Online, and that data would be copied to the portal where it would be quality assured and added into a master database behind the firewall. All right, and on to our next poll.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lane. All right, so the next one up is a little quiz here, right, to test some of the knowledge that we've gained so far. And this is a question probably for those of you that have implemented already, but if you haven't, you should still be able to get this one based off of what Lane says. And this is about, if you're an authoritative agency, can you share your hosted feature layer with multiple other agencies via multiple collaborations? So let's see how we're doing here in the polls as these answers come in. This is great. All right, we'll give that just another moment and we'll see where we land here. All right, so perfect. So almost everybody nailed this one. So the answer to that is yes, right? So almost 90% of us got that, and that is correct. And that's one of those patterns that Lane had shared with us here. And if we advance our slide, we can see here, this is just a graphic of what that looks like. So in that question, we were saying, hey, can we set up distributed collaboration with multiple organizations from a centralizing organization. So in this case, we have an example federal agency where we have a distributed collaboration with multiple other organizations, and we're sharing that out to those other organizations. So, all right, the next up for us here is we're going to hand it back to Tasha, who's going to talk to us about some key concepts to implement a distributed collaboration. Tasha?
Thanks, Craig. All right, let's start by talking about prerequisites for collaboration. What do you need to get started? So at a very minimum, you need an ArcGIS Enterprise based deployment, and that's going to include a server that's been federated with your portal and it's been set up as your hosting server. You'll also need an ArcGIS data store registered with your deployment. The earliest version at which you could do portal-to-portal collaboration is 10.5. And if you're looking to do collaboration between ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise Portal, that would be 10.5.1. Of course, we've added new functionality at every release, and a little later on, we're going to go through some of the interesting nuggets that we have here in our current release. All right, let's talk about the transmission of content between portals. All right, you can have, in this case, what we're looking at is a one-to-one, but you can actually have a one-to-many scenario. Just keep that in mind. For purposes of this webinar, we're going to keep it simple and we're going to look at a one-to-one type of scenario. So in this example, we're looking at collaboration between two portals. Now, there is one thing to note as we're going through these examples. The point of view of the guest is always taken into account when you're talking about transmission. So what does that mean? So we identify one portal as a host. We identify the other portal as the guest. We transmit either from host to guest or guest to host, but as we're setting up the collaboration, what we're going to do is take a look at the point of view of the guest. So let's take a look at this very first example. You see the host on the left, the guest on the right. What is the guest doing? The guest is receiving information from the host. So when we set up our collaboration, we're going to specify receive. Let's take a look at the middle example. In this case, the guest is sending to the host. All right, so again, from the point of view of the guest. I know it's a little tough, it may seem a little counterintuitive, but that's what you have to remember when you're setting up your collaboration. Our third example is actually a bidirectional communication. You do have the option for the hosts and the guests to send and receive. All right, in a portal-to-portal situation, either portal can be identified as the host. But let's take a look what happens when you have ArcGIS Online in the mix. When you have ArcGIS Online collaborating with a portal, ArcGIS Online will always be the host. All right, ArcGIS Online, always the host. Transmission is still seen from the point of view of the guest. So again, first example, same as on the previous slide. This is the guest receiving content from the host. Middle example, guest is sending to the host. And of course, our last example, you can certainly do bi-directional communication. Guest and host can both send and receive. All right, what are the kinds of things that I can share using a collaboration? It's not just data, although we are going to talk a lot in this webinar about hosted feature layers because there are a couple of things that are special about them and some things that you can do with hosted feature layers that don't apply to the other content types. But in addition to data, you have documents, you have web maps, web scenes, web apps, and the list goes on. Now, those of you using Operations Dashboard, you might notice that it's not yet on this list, right? Well, we're working on it, and that is something that is on our roadmap, and we've heard our customers loud and clear, and we're working to make that a possibility in an upcoming release. So let's focus now on hosted feature layers and sharing through a collaboration. So what are the options that you have, and why are hosted feature layers so special when it comes to a collaboration? Well, the first option to sharing is to share by copy. So what happens? Well, in the sender's portal, that hosted feature layer is packaged up, copy of it is packaged up, and it is sent over physically to the recipient where it is unpacked and another hosted feature service is created. All right, so it creates that full copy, sends it over, gets unpacked, new hosted feature layer is created on the recipient side. There is one thing to note in your item details for a hosted feature layer that you're setting by copy. In the item details, you want to make sure that you have enabled sync. Personally, this has burned me a couple of times. I've gone and done a collaboration and shared a hosted feature layer by copy, and it doesn't come over, and I'm left scratching my head, and then I go, oh, yep, I go to the item details, and I forgot to set sync on the layer. So now you know a little tip and trick when it comes to sharing by copy. The other option that you have for hosted feature layers is sharing by reference. What does this do? It does not physically copy over the data layer. It simply copies a pointer over to the recipient to where the data actually sits, which is in the sender's portal. So think about this for a second. If you are in the recipient portal and you do not have credentials to the sender's portal, and that hosted feature layer is shared by reference, you would actually need credentials in this portal in order to be able to access it, or the sender could share with everyone. So those are your two options until 10.8. New at 10.8, we now have the ability to store credentials with the sender's hosted feature layer that gets sent over to the recipient. So the recipient can open and view that data without having to have credentials in the sender's portal. So it's a pretty exciting thing that we have in our current release. So that is a little bit about what makes these hosted feature layers special and a little different from the rest of the content items that can be shared. So let's break it down now. Let's talk about what does it take to create a collaboration and what are the steps. In this example, we're taking a look at a collaboration between ArcGIS Online and Portal. Now, we said just a couple minutes ago, ArcGIS Online is always the host, and the host creates collaboration. They add the guests. You can actually have multiple guests. For this webinar, we're going to do one-to-one, keep it simple, but keep in mind you can actually have multiple guests. The host will determine if the guest will send, the guest will receive, or if you'll have bidirectional communication. Remember, again, it's always from that point of view of the guest. The next thing that the host does is creates an invitation file. And that invitation file is going to be sent over to the guest. The administrator on the guest side will take that invitation file and accept it, create a response file, and that response file gets transmitted securely back to the host. This is the key to forming that trusted collaboration, that trusted connection. These are the steps where it happens. A couple other things that the guest is going to be responsible to do. They are going to decide what the sync interval will be if data is updated on the guest side and it's getting sent over to the host, or even the other way around. But the guest is the one that determines the sync interval. Now, how does that data get from the host to the guest or the guest to the host? Really, what's happening is you're identifying a group in the host and a group in the guest. And that is how the content is transmitted from the group to the group through this trusted connection. So let's take a look at a couple of dialogues here. When the guest accepts that collaboration invitation, remember we had the invitation file created, transmitted securely to the guest is going to accept it, and then the guest creates this invitation response file and sends it back to the host. The host will then accept the guest organization. Now, we understand that a lot of you incorporate web tier authentication within your portals. So if you require that either on the host or the guest side when it comes to portals, we have the ability to implement that through the collaboration. So in this example, this is the dialogue that you would see if the host requires web tier authentication. You would click yes, And then if you're using integrated Windows authentication, you would enter your credentials. If you're using PKI, you would browse to a certificate file and then include the certificate password. Before this current release, if you wanted to edit anything about the web tier authentication, you would have to use the REST API. But what's nice about the current release is that you can now do this through a dialog. For those of you that are on earlier versions, I have a link here to that page in the API documentation if you need it. Similarly, when the host accepts the guest response, if that guest requires web tier authentication, you'll have the option to enter credentials if it's IWA, or the certificate and password if it's PKI. Okay, a couple of other things that'll happen as you create your collaboration. In this example, we have agency A on the left, agency B on the right. They're doing a portal-to-portal collaboration. We're going to say that agency A is the authoritative agency and they want to share data with agency B through a collaboration. Once you've established that collaboration, that trusted connection in the process we just saw, you'll identify a workspace. And really, a workspace is a communication channel that recognizes the groups that are participating on both the host and the guest side when it comes to sharing content. So agency A has identified their group into which they will share content that gets copied or referenced, however they chose to set it up, into agency B's destination group. Again, it's this group to group communication through the trusted connection. What the guest will do once the workspace is set up, they will identify their group into which content will be placed or received for the collaboration. If they are going to be doing the sharing, they will choose by reference or by copy. We said that the guest chooses the sync frequency, and it'll be between 1 and 24 hours. And then finally, the guest is going to join the workspace. All right, so let's go ahead and do a demo so you can see all of this in action. Let me just set up our scenario. What we have here in the center is, let's say, a federal agency enterprise portal. And that enterprise portal has created trusted collaborations with other entities that also have portals. Maybe it's a contractor, maybe it's a state agency, maybe it's a university partner. In our example today, and this is a completely notional, fictional example, we're going to say that the National Park Service has an enterprise portal, and they receive information on webcams that are set up throughout our national parks from the different national parks themselves. And they've set up trusted collaborations with these national parks to ingest any new webcams or updates to data relating to existing webcams. Now, NPS would like to share this data with the public. And so how do we do that without allowing the public to get to our portal here behind the firewall? Well, NPS, in this fictional example, has created this collaboration with ArcGIS Online, with the National Park Service ArcGIS Online. And so the public would hit the information here on the ArcGIS Online side, and they wouldn't have to be hitting the enterprise portal behind the firewall. And of course, they're going to take advantage of the scalability that ArcGIS Online provides. So it's going to be this portion that we're going to work on during the demo. We're going to create this collaboration, we're going to share some content, and then we're going to update some content, and you'll see how it updates on both sides. So let's go ahead and jump in. For our demo today, what we're going to do is an ArcGIS Online to ArcGIS Enterprise portal collaboration. So on the left-hand side, I have the ArcGIS Online organization. You can tell that because I have maps.arcgis.com in the URL. And on the right-hand side, we have our guest portal. I am going to be the administrator for ArcGIS Online, and Lane is going to be the administrator for the portal. Now, as we heard before, ArcGIS Online is always going to be the host, so I'm going to kick off the collaboration. All right, we're going to give it a name that pretty much describes what's happening here. We're collaborating between ArcGIS Online and portal. All right, the next step is going to be identify a workspace name. We're going to stick with our naming convention. and basically just add workspace. And this is the channel through which the collaboration, the host and the guest, communicate. All right, we're going to provide a group name. I like to be very specific, so I know exactly where this group belongs. Of course, we have to add tags. Okay. The guest is going to control the sync interval, but I do need to set that I would like to have hosted feature layers shared by copy. Now, I'd like to bring your attention here to this checkbox. If for some reason you share a hosted feature layer through a copy, but you forgot to enable that sync setting, this checkbox is going to ensure that the data is shared, but it's only going to be shared by reference. So if you see it being shared and you're thinking, well, why isn't there a physical hosted feature layer over on my side? Check those item details and make sure that you've enabled the sync. I'm going to identify the portal that's going to participate in this collaboration. And now we specify the directionality of the transmission. In this case, the guest has the authoritative data and info products, and they're going to share it with the host. If it's from the point of view of the guest, that means the guest is sending content. I'm saving that invitation, and I'm going to transmit it securely to the admin of our portal. So go ahead, Lane.
Thanks, Tasha. I will select the file from where it's been securely transmitted, navigate to where I saved it, and we'll accept the invitation after we have reviewed the naming convention to ensure this is the collaboration that we'd like to join. So accept it, and then the next step is to save a response file, which will be securely transmitted to Tasha to close the trusted connection.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So Lane has transmitted that response file to me. The next step is for the admin of the host to accept that guest organization by securing that response file and clicking accept. So that trusted link is now created between our organization and our portal. There is one last step that has to be done over here on the guest side.
So I then need to click on the collaboration name, and you'll see under status that we haven't actually joined the workspace. So to do that, I'll click on my action icon and choose Join Workspace. Next, I need to specify a name of the group that will be sending data to the host organization. To transfer information to the host, we're going to follow our naming convention and add our tags. And then the feature layers and views are going to be sent as copies because they've been approved for public consumption. If we have updates to the data, we're going to schedule them to be synced every hour and then click Join the Workspace. Now our collaboration workspace and groups are set up. We have a trusted connection now between the ArcGIS Online host and the guest portal. So now that we've joined the workspace, we're going to go back into our groups and navigate to the group that we just created. And we can see that we haven't shared any items yet. And so we'll go to our content and we'll share out some information products through the collaboration. So I'll share a data layer and a web map with the group on the guest side. It takes some time to package up the data and send it across the connection. So this may take a minute depending on our network connections on both the guest and the host side. So I'll hit refresh and I can see these items that have been shared to the group.
And you see that our content has been sent over. I want to draw your attention to this icon right here on these items. You'll see that these items were received from a collaboration. So that's how you know that this information has been shared from another source. Let's go ahead and open up our layer of webcams. And if I go to the US view, you see we have quite a few in our hosted feature layer. But I'm going to zoom into the area of Mount Rainier. And Lane, as the admin of the portal, has received information through a trusted collaboration that she has with Mount Rainier National Park, saying that they have added a new webcam. So our next step is going to be to edit the data layer and add this new information.
So we'll go and add a point at the Mount Rainier National Park headquarters at the Longmire region. We'll edit our new feature and place our webcam location. Normally we'd fill in all the attributes, but for the purposes of this demonstration, we'll add the image URL and the location of the webcam. And we'll save our edits. Normally, it would take about an hour for these new edits to sync to ArcGIS Online, but since we don't have that kind of time for this demonstration, we'll execute another immediate sync. And because we're sharing this data by copy, it'll take some time to package it up and send it over to Tasha via the trusted collaboration. While we wait for the new point to be sent over to ArcGIS Online, and this process can take a minute, let's look at some new release highlights and resource links.
Thank you very much. So some of our release highlights are, first of all, portal-to-portal collaboration was released at 10.5. The earliest version to collaborate between Enterprise and ArcGIS Online is at 10.5.1. And we've been adding new functionality ever since. One of our new features is the ability to store credentials for feature services shared by reference, as Tasha has mentioned a couple of times in this webinar. Another thing to note here is if you have a collaboration between two portals with different release numbers, it will always default the functionality to the earlier release. All right. A couple of notes here on our current release. If a hosted feature layer is set to share by copy, you can choose to set a property so that it automatically defaults to sharing by reference if something doesn't sync correctly. And remember earlier in the presentation, Tasha said you no longer have to edit and update the web tier authentication through the API. You can now do this through a dialog. Another important feature on our roadmap is that our customers have been requesting two-way editing, and currently edits are being pushed from the origin portal to the destination portal. But in those, the destination portal cannot send the edits back to the origin. So again, Esri is listening to our customers' needs and requests for performance and capabilities. Another request that we've heard is the ability to have dashboards. And so we are working on that. And we're gonna jump to the next slide for some recommended links. So here's some key resources, information, blog posts, examples, and fundamentals. And this will also offer a plethora of information around distributed collaboration and some considerations. So our documentation for distributed collaboration is actually pretty thorough, and it provides step-by-step instructions, examples, use case patterns, detailed documentation for not only setting up, but using a collaboration. So make sure to check this out and find your version. So finally, just to summarize, the value that distributed collaboration brings to your workflows is the ability to create a trusted connection to share content in a timely, authoritative, and automated way. In this presentation, you've seen a series of use cases that we've covered, collaborations between two portals, or ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise portal. Another quick pop quiz. So if you've been paying attention, you'll know who the host has to be in an instance between ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise. So the answer, of course, is that it must always be ArcGIS Online. One of the most important key takeaways from this webinar is that the transmission of content is started from the point of view of the guest. The guest sends, the guest receives, or you can have the option of choosing to do both sending and receiving. For the customers who implement web tier authentication, we've demonstrated how to enable it during a collaboration setup. A couple of things to note here. First, you can execute a sync immediately, or you can set an automatic sync to occur between 1 and 24 hours. Finally, remember the difference in sharing between copy and reference. Let's go back to see if our updates have occurred.
We can now see that the sync has been successful, and we can see the updated version of the data on both the guest and the host side.
So I think what I'd like to do now is hand it over to Craig to go through some questions. So if you don't mind, Craig, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to you.
Absolutely, thanks, Tasha. So yeah, we had a number of great questions come through here, and a question that I think was really good for the group here is, when using a hosted feature layer shared by reference, why can't I see or use it if I'm not a member of the portal where it originates? And the answer to that is because the portal security is kept in force And if you're not a member, you will not have access to this item. So in this case, we would either want to share the hosted feature layer by copy, or if possible, we'd want to share that layer with everyone in that source environment. And with that, I will pass it over to Ricklin to bring us towards the end here.
I want to go on ahead and thank everyone for attending today's session. And if you're interested in attending more webinars in the National Government Series, we invite you to visit the URL below. And with that, I hope everyone has a nice day.